Hey, folks. Welcome to the first episode of The Business of here at the Barton College School of Business and Innovation. Today, we have a very, very special guest. We have Dr. Michelle Fritsch. Did I pronounce that right?
That's right.
Okay, tell us about yourself, Michelle. I'd love to. I know people are going to realize very quickly that you and I know each other, but what I'd like to see is to talk about the business of wellness today. And wellness can mean lots of things to different people, but tell us
Yes.
about yourself, who you are, how you got there, and why wellness.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me. This is very exciting. My view of this comes from years of practicing as a primary care geriatric specialist clinical pharmacist, which is something that people might not have heard of before. And I've also been in academia all of my life. And so from that standpoint of being a professor as well as walking through life in primary care, you get to know your patients at a deeper level. And so there were a number of people that I got to walk through life with them for decades. And it struck me somewhere in probably my late 40s, early 50s, that my mentors, especially on the academic side, people that were deans and provosts and healthcare administrators who had really helped mentor me in my career, were wrapping up their own careers and not successfully. So many of them went from being, household names in their professions to fading away, not knowing what to do with themselves anymore, no longer kind of being in command of who they were and what they were doing, and sort of stumbled into the fact that they no longer had purpose and that was hugely detrimental to their health, to their relationships, and to their ability to live a good long time, which is what they had planned and hoped to do. So as soon as I had the awareness, I looked more deeply and saw that many leaders, people that are responsible for others, who build their practice, build their business, build their leadership skills, can begin to define themselves by those things and struggle on the other side. So I left academia and primary care, healthcare, to pursue this because I couldn't find where anybody was really in front of this and helping people plan not just the finances, which is what most people think of about future planning, but plan the wellness. And that's how I landed here.
That's just really amazing. And your company is called Propel, right?
Propel Comprehensive Wellness.
Right. So, and when you say wellness, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's almost like you have a focus that is on what you would kind of say as a tangent would be your portfolio of your like your business portfolio, your financial portfolio. But this is different. This is your portfolio of your being, your well-being, right?
I call
I
it
think it's
your
very
wellness
interesting.
portfolio.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really amazing. As you were talking, and here we are. We're talking from a college that it's filled with deans and professors and things like
Yeah.
that. And you talk about the decline, the fading away, and I thought, wow, wow. I mean, who hasn't known someone like that? I mean, maybe if you go back to a reunion or some sort of college function of your alma mater, and you see that professor that you loved that was such a bright light, and then 20, 30 years on, they're not quite the same person. It's always a shock.
It is.
Talk a bit about because you're right. This happens in every profession. We were talking about physicians earlier, and we were talking about just being in business, entrepreneurs even, right? Um, it happens to everyone. So
Does.
why don't we spend more time thinking about it and preparing for that? You think that we spend so much time with our 401ks and we watch the stock market so carefully. Why don't we watch our physical beings as well? I mean, what is it about humans that kind of pushes that away?
Been studying this for a decade now, trying to answer that question. And some of the things that I've noticed, one is numbers are very objective. You can get your arms around how much money is there, how that money could be delivered to you over time, what that would look like. There are even multiple different platforms that you can plug specific numbers into and it will give you projections. It's just very tangible. Our health is different. It's very, very personal. And it can be hard for people, especially people that have been in leadership positions their whole life, to be that transparent, comfortable being that transparent to look at those things. And I also find for those that are married, early in the relationship, you do all of this bright-eyed dreaming, right? This is what our life is going to look like. We're going to have, 2.3 children, and we're going to live in a 4,000 square foot house, and whatever those plans are. And that includes, and this is what we're going to do in retirement. And often that conversation doesn't continue. And so those initial agreements are just assumed to still be in place. But yet, so much life has happened. So many things have changed. Priorities have shifted. And so people think, well, when, I have the retirement party on Friday, I will have buttoned that up carefully. On Monday, I'll dive into what life looks like after. And I'll have plenty of time to figure that out because now I won't have
Right.
anything distracting me. And unfortunately, what I've seen is people can become so disillusioned when they get there that they very rapidly decline, and we just can't pull them back. So planning is critical to avoid that decline.
I get that now, but I think everyone does planning, and I think everybody has a plan, or they think they have a plan, right?
I
And
think
or they say, "Well, I had a plan 20 years ago, and here I am now, faced with having to execute said plan, and things have changed. And maybe even partners have changed, right? Certainly, professions have changed. We've gone from a situation where, our grandparents probably worked in the same professions for 30 years, and now the average person changes jobs every 3 or 4 years, right? So that's all changed. So when you say, "I'm getting ready for that," retirement word or whatever that is, that next phase of life, I can see how decline could come very quickly if you suddenly are faced with that disorienting dilemma of what do I do now? So to talk a
exactly.
bit about that and the business of that, is the decline like immediate, or does it happen over a few months? Or talk a bit about that, and how your business kind of works to stop that.
Like everything, there's a variable response. So I'll go from the worst kind of end of the spectrum I've seen to the best. Worst end of the spectrum was someone's they knew that the end of their career was coming. They were an executive. The company was sold. They thought they were going to be retained with the new owners, and they weren't. So they were suddenly without a job, if you will. And it wasn't a financial insecurity, it was a how can I be unemployed? I was an executive of a big company. So this person rapidly jumped into another position. Didn't take
Wow.
time to kind of breathe after leaving the first and consider options for the second. Certainly didn't think about, what they were drawn to for fulfillment and purpose. They just jumped to another job that was a terrible, terrible fit. So then they reached a point where they had to quit that job and had no plan for what comes next and went through 2 weeks where they were so stressed they could not sleep. And sleep is so restorative, and they had a mental break. And it's now been a couple of years, and there's actually been a brain scan done, and the part of the brain was permanently damaged from that 2 weeks of
Wow.
not sleeping. I didn't realize how devastating that. I knew I had had patients had mental breaks. I'd never seen this level of destruction. So that's kind of worst case scenario, but that was an executive of a big company. And then there are people who they just kind of lose their sense of self and, sit on the couch too much and watch way too much Netflix, and that causes a cognitive decline. They're not as
Right.
physically active, they put on more weight, they eat more junk food, and that causes that kind of expected, if you will, physical decline and removes the opportunity to do some of the more active things they had always thought they would do. Someone that I have worked for in the past had worked very hard for over 40 years and was one of those leaders that was the first in the office and the last to leave and barely at home. But if you talk to him, things were great at home. And then the day came where he announced that he had decided to retire, and his wife said, hands on hips, you're not going to be in this house all day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So assumptions were made for probably decades that this is what was going to happen. And then it was incongruous at the very end. It was like, no, this is my plan. This is your plan. It wasn't the same plan. And it hit right at the wrong possible moment, probably.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Others plan to do big trips, 3 months abroad kind of thing. And then they didn't end their careers at the same time, and so one committed to something else while waiting, and often that something else is grandchildren or volunteer projects
Right.
or different things, but they don't feel like they can now leave for months at a time. And then we know that the divorce rate for people around their 50s is the highest it's ever been in the history of the planet, and seems to still be rising. Sadly, we know the suicide rate, that when we think about suicide and people ending their lives, there's a lot of emphasis placed on teens and people in their early 20s, as there should be, but that's not the group with the highest suicide rate. It's men around retirement and beyond. And some of
Right.
that is loss of sense of self, and some of that is not knowing how to navigate certain types of health conditions and feeling like it's going to drain the finances. And I have yet to talk to a family who knew that the man was making that kind of decision or that would ever have wanted him to make that decision to save the money. So there's a lot of complexities to it.
It's surprising to me that the business of wellness is not quite as, out there as it should be. I mean, we talk about portfolio managers every day, but we're assuming that's a financial portfolio. We don't think about my wellness portfolio. So talk about the business as we kind of close up here today. I'd like to ask a few specific questions about what made you address these root causes that you're talking about, and how did you find that you needed to be in business to address this very serious and needed function?
It turned out to be a good thing that I was in academia and that I'm a science geek, and I had to research this and say, well, what is out there to help people plan this part, and find very, very little. And so, again, I used the National Science Foundation process, and I interviewed about 100 different people that were nearing the end of their career, right at the transition, or within the first few years after the transition. And from those interviews, developed this series of tools that we use to guide people to design their wellness portfolio. So we dive into, how do you control your health? How do you take control so no mistakes are made about your health, because you know what to do, how to present it, how to interact with healthcare. You know your risk factors. You've identified what's going to bring you true fulfillment on the other side. You know how to stay mentally sharp. You know what your relationships are going to be, and they're prepared, and you've made some personal decisions that will prevent chaos. So all of those were the missing links we found. And so we've built all of it into the Propel process.
I think that's fantastic. You talked about folks, particularly men of a certain age, losing that ability to navigate. It sounds like the business of wellness for Propel, at least, is helping them address those things and helping them navigate this next part of their lives.
Well, I was going to say, even to the point of, sometimes we go with people to their doctor visits. If they're really not sure what to expect or how to discuss something with their doctor, and we've, prepared for it ahead of time, often I'm on the phone while they're in a doctor visit when they give permissions. And I'm thrilled that most of healthcare is very open to that. They want good communication. They want to make sure all of the issues are addressed during a visit. So that's one of the rewarding pieces of this process.
And it's difficult to sandbag, is the term I would use. If I'm sitting in the doctor's office and the doctor asks me how I'm doing, I'm going to say fine. But if you've got your partner or your advocate, in your case, sitting there with you,
Mhm.
it's harder to say fine. It's almost like growing up with your kids. How'd you do in school today? You have to learn how to ask questions differently. Tell
Right.
me about your day. Tell me about your health. Tell me about what you did this morning. I can really sense that having someone like you as an advocate would be very beneficial to me as I'm preparing for the next phase of my life, right? I think that's really interesting how you've created a business around this. Business should have been, front and center all along. It shouldn't have
Right.
to be something we had to kind of discover that, hey, we need this thing. But I'm glad that you have, and I'm glad you did.
We think of wellness often from the physical standpoint, but we also get into the social, the spiritual, and the mental, emotional, and how someone manages stress, especially during that big life transition, has a huge indication on what their life will be like after. So if they don't manage the stress well, their risk of heart attack, of weight gain, of physical decline, of anxiety, of depression all goes up. Your immune system is weaker. And there's now data that even the risk of cancer and dementia is related to having stress over time and not knowing how to manage it. So managing that stress is another, all those elements of health and managing stress are big components of Propel.
Well, yeah, that's really interesting that you brought that up because I believe that as well. I think if we can find a way to manage the stress in our lives, it makes it easier to live. If we kind of bottle it up, or if we, I mean, how many times we've had uncles and aunts and people in our families that we just saw the decline because they just were, I don't know what we would call it back in those days, but they were just not able to manage life's, issues very well. And it's really sad because you've got to find a way to have that balance in your life. You've got to, because yes, of course, life is going to come with issues and stress and things like that, but it's how you manage it and how you work with that. You can't just avoid it. You just can't eat it away or hide it away or tuck it away or push it away. You've got to find a way to address it and make life valuable and worth living. And I think if I'd have had someone like you, earlier in my life, it'd been easier to kind of have that plan. Do you ever do any work with young couples? Because I know that when I was young, getting ready to get married and that sort of thing, we actually had to talk to various kind of counselors. I thought at the time, I thought, okay, this is just perfunctory. But I
Love
think
to.
their heart was in the right place. But I'm thinking, yeah, yeah, I got this. I'm 22 years old and I've got this. But it would have been great to talk to someone about this kind of thing. I mean, not just the portfolio, the financial portfolio, not just the spiritual portfolio, but the wellness portfolio. So I think that you've really come along at a great time. I just wish you would have come along 30 years ago.
A little bit earlier. And you know what? That was something that struck me when I was at the concierge medicine conference last week. I need to be talking to the millennials, the millennial doctors,
Right.
the millennial professionals. I think they are a generation who, in general, is a little more comfortable with transparency and a little more aware of the power of prevention and being proactive in general. The boomer generation that I've worked with, I mean, once we get started, all of our clients have loved it. But getting it started there's been a lot of pushback or I've got this. And then I'm learning same with Gen X right now. So, broad strokes. I think millennials will be maybe more open to this kind of planning.
I've got one final thought because as we were talking about this, I thought, you know, on the financial portfolio side and the wellness portfolio side, I think you see a lot of commonalities on the financial trying to sell wellness. And I said that very specifically, sell wellness, because I've been in lots of conversations with insurance salesmen, financial advisors, that sort of thing. And the conversation would always turn to, what do you want to do in your retirement? Where do
Right.
you want to be? Do you want to do travel? It's almost like sitting through a timeshare sales pitch. Because, like, don't you want to enjoy your lives? Don't you want to take 3 weeks
Right. Right.
and do? And it's a very different kind of mind twist, if you want to call it that.
It is.
When I think yours is more of an authentic. It was easier for me to sign a piece of paper that says, "Oh, here's $1 million for my retirement, policy," because that hits on a different part of my brain because I can quantify it, as opposed to saying, "Let's not talk about the money. Let's not talk about a financial instrument. Let's talk about you and your heart and your goals and your partner and the things you want to do." That's a different conversation. Why do we see it so pervasive with some of these financial portfolio and salespeople?
It's a real trend right now. My second name of my business, so this is part of the business part. You've got to pivot, as trends happen. So my second name was Retirement Wellness Strategies. And I thought that would differentiate me, yet align me with the financial planners. That this is the other piece of that puzzle. And it didn't. Now many, many financial groups are talking about retirement wellness all around finances, financial wellness. And I've spoken with many financial
Wow.
planners about, they all say you need purpose. And so I asked them, what does that mean? Oh, stuff to do, like play golf and play with the grandchildren. I'm like, that is not purpose. That is staying busy. And staying busy
Yeah.
has its own benefits, but that's not purpose. That's not the fulfillment that's going to really keep you going. So they're using words like wellness and purpose without a true grasp of even what they are. And that's where we can come in and fill those gaps.
Tell us where we can find more about Propel. and Propel Wellness and Michelle?
Sure. So propelyourwellness.com, or you can reach me, Michelle, with two L's, Michelle at propelyourwellness.com. And I would be glad to answer any questions. And you'll find a link there to schedule a phone call with me or to ask more questions.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us for our inaugural episode of the program, the Barton College School of Business and Innovation, The Business of Wellness with Dr. Michelle Fritsch. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.